Ever since Generation 2, berries have had a important place in Pokemon battling, both in-game and in competitive, but in certain generations, berries have had different ways of expressing themselves. For example, in Generation 2, berries didn't look at all like they do nowadays. They didn't have the same names. Paralysis Cure Berry or Miracle Berry, those no longer exist. Now the berries all have really weird names like the Nanab berry, which is just basically a banana. A lot of the names are just anagrams of a real world fruit or other vegetables even. So we're just going to limit our discussion of berries to Generation 8, or maybe moving forward from Generation 8, but we don't really know how it'll be, so all that could be a speculation at best. And we're going to maybe reference some earlier gens like Gen 7 specifically. But for the most part, we're going to limit our discussion to Gen 8 because most generations have some unique quirks to berries that you have to consider, but that will be a bit more advanced than I want to get into this guide. So, berries are pretty important, and there are a few different ways that you can use berries. I got them listed here on the screen, and we've got 6 main ways that you can use berries in battle. Now, the first way, of course, is healing your HP. Your Pokemon eats the berry, they go nom 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 nom, and they get healthy again. The second way is similar onto it. You've got healing status, and that's often quite important. The third way is that if a Pokemon will hit you with a super effective move, then you can reduce the damage taken by that move. And you'll only get one chance to do that, but that could be the one chance you needed to be able to beat that Pokemon that was supposed to beat you, and then you don't need that item anymore because you did what it was supposed to do. The next one is that a berry can raise a Pokemon's stats. That can sometimes be useful. And the next one is that your berries can damage your opponent. And you'll see more what I mean when we talk about that specifically. The next one is the Custap berry specifically. The Custap berry allows you to move during the next turn at an increased priority compared to everybody else in that priority bracket. So quick attack will still go before your move, but at your move will get the highest possible value it can get in your priority bracket. So quick attack will go before you, but even if I am an Avalugg and you are a Regieleki, I will still go before you. Even if we're still in Trick Room, I will still go before you. Does not matter. I get to go first if we ignore things like quick attack or extreme speed. So that's a pretty powerful berry. Oftentimes, Custap berry won't come out at the beginning of a generation, and you'll have to wait a while before it's allowed in competitive, but it just depends on the generation. The final one is sort of a bonus. The Leppa berry restores PP to a Pokemon, which is very useful. It gives you a replenishable way to get PP restoration in-game, because normally things like elixirs and ethers are not something you can go buy at the Pokemart, and so the Leppa can be pretty important in-game. However, Leppa berries are banned in Smogon competitive because they can enable people to create infinite battles. And I don't know how much that is true nowadays, but that was definitely true back in the day, and because people are afraid of that ever becoming a thing again, it has just been generally understood that that's going to be banned in perpetuity because it doesn't do anything really for anybody, and the Leppa berry could be pretty annoying when creating infinite battle setups. So we're not going to worry about the Leppa berry. Alright, the next question you might have when it comes to berries is, when do I use berries? There are multiple Pokemon that could hold a berry. When is a good idea to use a berry, and when maybe do I want to use a different item? Generally, the idea of using berries is, how does a berry synergize with what I currently have as either an ability or a possible move that I can use? Those are the things I have to consider. We don't usually just slap berries on any random Pokemon, especially because items like leftovers exist, items like heavy duty boots exist, and they're generally a lot more useful than berries. There are some meme strats that we could consider, and draft format is a little bit of a different beast because in draft format you know what your opponent is bringing, and so you can prepare specifically for that opponent's team. But if we're just talking about random showdown battles, or if we're talking about loading up a team on your cartridge and playing in Battle Stadium singles, then we want to have some really solid, repeatable game plans for when berries will consistently be able to be used. So the list that I've come up with includes Pokemon with the Unburden ability, Pokemon with the Harvest ability, Pokemon that can use the move Recycle, or for Snorlax, G-Max Replenish. You've got Pokemon with either the Gluttony or the Cheek Pouch ability, or abilities like that. You've got the move Belly Drum, Natural Gift, which is only really useful in draft, but I will mention it here. Then you've got the move Belch, which can be useful occasionally. Then you have Pokemon with the Sturdy ability, and they will use specifically the Custat Berry. And then finally, in Battle Stadium singles, because there is the item clause, and I suppose this applies to VGC too, but we're not going to cover VGC in this video. The item clause means that I can only bring one of each item. Now that is as opposed to the Smogon format, which allows you to bring 6 of the same item. So I could bring 6 Focus Ashes, or 6 Choice Bands, or 6 Life Orbs, or 6 Heavy Duty Boots, and that would be totally legal. But on cartridge, that's not allowed. So on cartridge, you have to be a little more creative with your items, and since your opponent has to do the same, that still remains balanced. This, as a result, allows berries to take a lot more of a prominent role on cartridge, because, well, I can't use what I might have thought would normally be the best option. I'll take the next best option. A cartridge also is a bit more limiting in its format because they don't have as many bands, and so certain Pokemon really grow to dominate the metagame, and so you can play around with those specific Pokemon and have maybe resist berries, and those tend to come in more into play on cartridge. So there's one rule to berries that you need to always keep in mind, no matter what, and this is a universal rule. The universal rule for berries is that you need to be able to control when or how the berry is used. Let me repeat that. The number one rule for berries is that you have to be able to control when or how you're using your berry. This is very important. So, for example, if I have a citrus berry, that will restore my HP. I don't want my opponent to be making me eat my berry at a time when I didn't want them to make me eat the berry. Or maybe I have a lum berry. If my opponent uses up my lum berry when I'm not ready for them to have used it up, then that was a waste. And so that's not going to be an optimal game strategy, and therefore either the berry itself is not optimal, or the way you are using it or building your team around it is not optimal. And so you have to really consider all of that. So let's get into how to use berries and when to use them, and hopefully what I'm saying about controlling when or how the berry is used will become a bit more clear. So in the first category of berries, we have berries that can heal your HP. The first and most likely berry to think of when you're thinking of such a berry would be the citrus berry. The citrus berry can restore 25% of your HP when you are at 50% HP, which is rather nice. It gives you a decent heal, but it doesn't take you all the way back up to full, so you just have to sort of live with that. Now, the citrus berry is nice because no matter if I'm a Blissey or if I'm a Dugtrio, doesn't matter how much HP I have, I'm always going to get back a certain percentage amount, which allows citrus berries to be useful no matter what part of the game you are in. So citrus berries are pretty useful. However, all they do is restore HP, and at the end of the day, you could say, why don't I just run leftovers? Because leftovers will always be restoring my HP, and in a long battle, I can get back more HP than I would have gotten with a citrus berry. And this is true. But occasionally there are Pokemon who need to take certain hits and then retaliate back. And certain Pokemon in the metagame may be able to beat you down if you have leftovers. So as an example, if I have Greninja out against a Rotom Wash, Greninja will do a good amount to the Rotom with Dark Pulse. And the Rotom needs to be able to live 2 Dark Pulses to switch in, take Dark Pulse, and then Volt Switch out, and that will force the Greninja to have to switch. And I have to be able to do that 2 times. And the only way that's going to consistently work is if it is using a citrus berry, because then it will get back a lot of its health all at once after taking a Dark Pulse, whereas the leftovers would not normally heal the Rotom fast enough to be able to come back in and duel that Greninja again. So, generally speaking, leftovers could, in theory, recover more HP over the course of a battle, but the Citrus Berry can often be useful for specific scenarios where you need to live Pokemon's hit and then retaliate. However, if you're going to do that, you have to know exactly what scenario you're setting it up for, and then if you have to use that scenario in a particular battle, right? If my opponent has no Greninja, well then I can get my Citrus Berry eaten basically whenever. But if my opponent does have a Greninja, I have to make sure that I save my Citrus Berry for that specific situation. And there are other instances where you may choose to use the Citrus Berry. Citrus Berry is not a bad item to have, but you have to know that that's the item you're going for. Your Pokemon will be weaker, right? It won't be as offensively oriented as if it could have been if it had a choice scarf or a choice band, and it's not going to have heavy duty boots, which is a really useful item, and I sort of invalidated a lot of Pokemon that otherwise might have ran a Citrus Berry, or invalidated their use of a Citrus Berry, rather I should say, because they'd rather run the heavy duty boots over the berry. Citrus Berry can also be used on Pokemon that know that they're going to lose health, like Pokemon that use the move Belly Drum. Belly Drum will remove 50% of my HP, so if I can have my HP EV such that I will get down to that 50% threshold after using Belly Drum, then I will immediately eat my Citrus Berry and beat a reasonable amount of HP even after cutting it by half with Belly Drum. But then that Pokemon can't come in and take random hits, because then it'll eat its Citrus and it won't be able to Belly Drum later in the battle. So again, you're making sure that you can control the time at which you use your Citrus Berry. And we'll talk more about Belly Drum when we get to that section of the video. The next berry that can restore health is the Oran Berry. The Oran Berry is generally a Pokemon player's first introduction to berries. The Oran Berry will restore 10 health points, and 10 health points is not very much. It's at the beginning of the game not even that much, but it is a decent amount. In fact, at the beginning of the game, the Oran Berry can feel a lot like the Citrus Berry. And when a Pokemon has very few health points, an Oran Berry does restore more HP. So if I have a level 5 Pokemon, I would not want to use Citrus Berry, I would want to use an Oran Berry, because the percentage of the health that you will heal back will be greater with an Oran Berry. However, there is an item out there that invalidates the Oran Berry entirely, and that is Berry Juice. Berry Juice does the exact same thing as an Oran Berry, but it restores 20 HP over 10 HP. And so in Little Cup, where Pokemon are all level 5, and this is an unofficial metagame, but it is still quite fun, Berry Juice is often used on Pokemon that want to get a second lease at life. If they can get their health below 50%, then the Berry Juice will give them full health all over again, because basically no Pokemon in Little Cup have more than 20 HP, so as long as they're still alive, they will get back up to full. So it can be a quite useful item in Little Cup, specifically. But otherwise, you would never see either of these berries. The next type of berry I'm going to call a fat berry or a super berry. And this berry is one that before Generation 7 was not really ever used. And this includes things like Figgy or Wiki or Iapapa berries. These berries nowadays in Generation 8 restore 33% of your health, but only when your HP falls below 25%. So you do restore more health than you would with a Citrus Berry, but the HP requirement is more risky, more stringent, because you have to have a lower HP amount to get the benefits. Now, Pokemon with the Gluttony ability can still eat these berries at 50%, and so Pokemon with Gluttony will still use these because they are superior to Citrus Berries. However, because the 33% is only marginally better than the 25% that you would have gotten with the safer Citrus option, Citrus is generally preferred to the fat berries. However, the reason the fat berries got their name is that in Generation 7, in the Alola region, the berries became more powerful and would actually restore 50% of your HP instead of 33%. And in Generation 7 specifically, the berries were often used on Pokemon that wanted to get a lot of health back, because getting that risk reward now was worth it, right? I had to get my health to 25%. Well, that's fine, because 50% health back is quite powerful. And so you did see them a lot more often then. And so that's why they're called fat berries or super berries or whatever you want to call them. Because in Generation 7 specifically, they were quite super. But then they were nerfed in Generation 8, and now you don't see them very much at all. Now, besides healing HP, berries can heal status. And there are many berries that can heal status, but the Lum Berry is the strongest berry out of all of them, because the Lum Berry acts as a full heal. It can heal confusion, it can heal burn, it can heal sleep or freeze or paralysis or any number of ailments, as opposed to other berries which might be more specific. And so Lum Berry, if you want to be completely worry-free about status for at least one time of it getting status, is a fantastic option. There are a few scenarios where Lum Berry is very powerful. Lum Berry is often seen on setup sweepers. Setup sweepers may want to set up a dragon dance or a swords dance, and if they get burned or toxic during doing that, or even paralyzed, then their sweep can be rendered null and void. So it's very important for them to be able to not be able to get status while they're setting up. Oftentimes, setup sweepers want to set up in front of a bulky or fat Pokemon that can't threaten them offensively, but these Pokemon often carry status moves. So having the Lum Berry gives these setup sweepers a free turn in order to get their stats increased, while not having to worry about any negative repercussions from a status. A setup sweeper can often use Lum Berry as a backup for getting put to sleep or paralyzed or toxic, but certain ones will even use moves like Outrage. So a Dragon Dance Salamence, for instance, could carry a Lum Berry, and if it used the move Outrage, the Outrage move will confuse it after the end of 2 turns or 3 turns, depending on how lucky or unlucky you are. And that confusion can also be cured by Lum Berry. So maybe you didn't get toxic or paralyzed or burned, in which case, lucky you can lock yourself into Outrage and not have to worry about the Outrage confusion. Now, the move Outrage has become a lot less usable with the introduction of the Fairy typing, meaning that it was even more punishable in Generation 6 and beyond than it was previously. And since Generation 6, I feel like you've seen less and less of the Lum Berry setup sweeper. But Lum Berry is still an item that I personally quite enjoy using on my setup sweepers, specifically Pokemon like Haxorus, because they can not only use it for Outrage if they so choose to run it, but also it just means that I know no matter what, I'm not getting status, at least for one time, and I can get my setup going and then sweep the opponent's team. So it's very nice. Now there's one other berry that can heal a status which we do need to talk about, and that's the Chesto Berry. Now the Chesto Berry only heals one status, and that is sleep. And you might say, well, it seems like a Lum Berry would be that in every scenario. The Chesto Berry has one instance where you would use it over a Lum Berry, and that is if you are a Pokemon that needs to use Rest to heal. Now, some Pokemon were blessed with moves like Recover or Slack Off, and they can heal independently of going to sleep. However, for the vast majority of Pokemon, they don't have such an option, and Rest is their only option. And then they'd go to sleep, and they don't want to be asleep, of course. So the Chesto Berry will wake you up. But the Lum Berry could wake them up too, right? But let's say that I burn a Snorlax while it's setting up a curse. Then the Snorlax wants to heal off the damage it took while it was setting up, so it uses the move Rest. But because it got burned, if it was holding the Lum Berry, then the Lum Berry would have been used up to heal the burn, and then I would be asleep for 2 turns because of the move Rest. However, Chesto Berry is not going to heal the burn. It will only heal me when I go to sleep for Rest, and then I can immediately wake up again. So this strategy is commonly called Resto Chesto, because Rest is the move that you use, and Chesto Berry is the item that goes along with it. So Chesto Berry is specifically used for Rest Pokemon, Snorlax being a very good example of that, and another one maybe being Suicune, some versions of it. So those are berries that will heal your status. Now let's move on to berries that will make you take less damage. Now there are a whole host of berries. In fact, there is a berry for every single type of Pokemon move. When Fairy was introduced, they added the Roselli Berry, so there's even one for that. Now every single type can hit a Pokemon super effectively, except for normal. but even normal has a berry, and we'll talk about that in a second. Berries such as the rindo berry, the aka berry, the shuka berry, the yachi berry, the wakan berry, or even sometimes a babiri berry are used in competitive Pokemon to reduce the damage that would otherwise be taken by a particular move. Now, I must stipulate that the move must be super effective on a Pokemon. So an aka berry on a Metagross or a shuka berry on a Rhyperior will work, but if I put a rindo berry onto my Typhlosion, that will not work because grass is not super effective against fire. Therefore, it would never be able to be super effective against you. Unless, I suppose, somebody used Silk on your Typhlosion. But we're not worried about that. Yachi Berry is quite popular for a lot of Pokemon that are sometimes 4 times super effective against ice. Many dragon types are 4 times super effective, or takes 4 times super effective damage from ice moves. And Yachi Berry allows them to live certain hits that otherwise would be fatal. Wakan Berry is occasionally seen on Pokemon such as Gyarados, who are 4 times weak to electric. Many of these tend to be on Pokemon that are 4 times weak to something. The Berry similarly on Pokemon that are 4 times weak to steel, like Diancie. However, because you have to know that your opponent is going to use such a move on you, this is generally limited to metagames that are either very established or Draft League where you know what your opponent is going to bring. Occasionally, when you're using this on Wi-Fi, you can sometimes see these berries be used just because you have no better option and item clause restricts you. But even then, I think these generally don't do quite as well, especially nowadays. The normal type berry is the Chillon berry, and the Chillon berry is a very weird berry because, of course, normal type does not do super effective damage. So the stipulation is just that any normal type move used against the holder of the Chillon berry will proc it, and then you'll take reduced damage from the normal type move. And this is used only in one occasion that I can personally think of, and that would be the Ubers tier, where Arceus uses extreme speed, and that can be very powerful to sweep through teams. And if I have a Pokemon with a Chillon berry, then I will take reduced damage from that extreme speed, and then I can revenge kill the Arceus in return. And that's the only time I can think of using it. Now there is one resist berry that I haven't mentioned yet that I do want to talk about for a bit, and that's the Colbur berry. The Colbur berry still remains to this day the most used resist berry in competitive Pokemon. The reason for this is that knockoff is a very powerful move, but it becomes far less powerful after your item has been knocked off. Now knockoff is used by physical attackers, but sometimes there are physical walls that will be weak to knockoff, such as Slowbro, and Slowbro doesn't want to have to run away from these physical attackers that would be using knockoff on it. And so if it uses the Colbur berry, then it can actually take far less damage from the initial knockoff, and then after that it will take, about the same amount from a reduced knockoff because they are no longer holding an item. Slowbro is a very interesting Colbur berry user specifically because it also has the move Body Press, which can oftentimes really punish Pokemon that might be knocking it off, like Bisharp or Weavile. And so those Pokemon would take 4 times super effective against from Body Press, and then your Colbur berry was quite well used because now they're dead and you're still alive. So Colbur berry still sees quite a bit of use on certain Pokemon that were meant to switch into knockoff but couldn't because they were weak to it, but were supposed to be the physical defensive walls. And so that's the only berry that currently sees consistent use at all. The next group of berries that we should talk about briefly are the berries that will raise your stats. Now, there are berries that will raise your attack or your defense or your special attack or your special defense or your speed. There's some that will raise your critical hit ratio. There's even one that will make your next move more accurate. However, only really one of those is currently ever used at all, and that's the Salac berry. The Salac berry will raise your speed by 1 stage. One of the reasons these berries are not very used very often is because they, similarly to the fat berries, only can be used when you're at 25% health. These berries are all often called pinch berries, The fat berries are often called pinch berries as well because it's when you are in a pinch, quote unquote. And that's when you're at 25% HP. That's when your HP bar goes to red. So the pinch berries rely on you getting into a bad spot already, which is usually not a good thing. However, the Salak berry gives you speed, and when I'm faster than my opponent, then I have a higher chance of being able to beat them. So sometimes you will see a Salak berry on Pokemon specifically because they can get out of a tight situation with extra speed. But generally speaking, even then, those Pokemon that run a Salak berry are manufactured specifically to abuse the extra speed to help with their otherwise high stats. And we'll talk more about specific examples when we get into the later sections. But for now, just know that although other stat boosting berries do exist, the Salak berry really is the only one that is currently used in competitive. Finally, we have the berries that will damage your opponent. Now, there are two berries specifically that will damage your opponent, the Jacoba berry and the Roap berry. I don't know if I'm pronouncing those correctly because you never hear people talk about them. Or Jaboka berry, rather. The Jaboka berry and the Roap berry. Now, these berries act like a rocky helmet, where if your opponent attacks you with a physical attack, or in the Roap case, a special attack, then they will take a certain percentage of their health. And that can be nice, I guess, if you wanted to get rid of your berry. But if you wanted to keep your item, then why wouldn't you just run a rocky helmet for the physical? Which is why nobody ever talks about the Jaboka berry at all, because the rocky helmet is just superior. And the Roap berry doesn't really do too much, and it's only one-time use, so never sees use either. However, I do want to say that Natural Gift does act in a similar fashion to the rest of what you would consider for this category, right? It's a move that uses berries to damage your opponent. So Natural Gift is an interesting move because it takes the berry that you're holding and consumes it immediately and turns it into a new move of a corresponding type and base power. So you can look at a chart and I'll have the berries that are the strongest for their respective types up on the screen. And those are the berries that you would use to get a Natural Gift of that base power. So this can be really useful for Pokemon that need extra coverage options, but because it's only a one-time use deal, unless you have, I guess, Recycle, then you really have to commit to using it on that turn. And a lot of times, Pokemon that have Natural Gift don't necessarily know if they'll ever need that Natural Gift in the game they'll be fighting. And they'll really limit themselves because, generally speaking, the berries that are used for Natural Gift are not otherwise very useful. In fact, some of these berries don't even have effects that can be procced in battle. So, you really hamper yourself by using Natural Gift. However, sometimes it can be quite useful. The other thing is the Natural Gift is not a widely distributed move, and so only certain Pokemon can use it. So Natural Gift does not usually see much competitive use outside of Draft League. I also want to include Belch in this particular section briefly, just because Belch is another way to use berries to damage your opponent. But that's only really because it's enabling you to use the move Belch. So it does fit into this section, but I'm just going to sort of hand wave it, and we're going to move on to Custap Berry. The Custap Berry is the final one I had on the list, and the Custap Berry allows you to move in a higher bracket like we talked about before, so that you get to outspeed your opponent. And that is a very useful ability on specific Pokemon. So those are all the different categories in depth of how to, what they can give you in terms of utility for your Pokemon, in battle at least. So keep those in mind. If you're looking to use a specific berry, ask yourself, can I control when this berry is going to be used? And if you can, then you can maybe use it competitively. But like I said, berries are often not seen in competitive anymore because there are just so many superior items. So you really have to justify it. So let's see what times Pokemon are justified in using berries. The first ability is Unburden. Unburden is used on a variety of Pokemon, and some of the more salient examples of Unburden users that use a berry would be Drifblim. Drifblim sometimes uses a citrus berry to get into Unburden range. Slurpuff also uses a citrus berry to get into Unburden range. As soon as they dip below that 50%, they'll get some health back, and they'll be twice as fast as they were before. Quite useful. So, as long as you bring in your Slurpuff or your Drifblim when you want to get fast, then you're good to go. However, you can't just bring in your Slurpuff or your Drifblim on any old move unless you're willing to waste your Unburden boost, because you only get your Unburden boost once. So generally these Pokemon only come in once they're ready to do their thing. That means that they can generally control better how they're going to use their citrus berry. Oftentimes, Pokemon will control when they use their citrus berry by using the move Substitute. If they use the move Substitute twice, then they can get down to that 50% threshold. Or in Slurpuff's case, it uses the move Belly Drum to get down to 50%, and then it uses the citrus berry. And at that point, the Pokemon itself is controlling when a citrus berry gets eaten. It doesn't have to worry about, oh, how much damage will my opponent do to me in order to get me into this specific range? I will get myself into that specific range. Thank you very much. So, other Unburdened Pokemon generally do not use citrus berry or any other kind of berry because they have other means of creating their Unburdened boost. But those two Pokemon specifically do use the citrus berry at times. The next ability is the Harvest ability. Harvest ability isn't seen on too many Pokemon, but the Pokemon that do have it often use it. Exeggutor, both forms have Harvest, and although they have other abilities that can see some use, the Harvest abilities are decent on them. Normal Kintonian Exeggutor is not very good currently. However, it can use a sub-Leech Seed Harvest set to stall out an opponent. By substituting, they can get themselves down to a decently low HP and get back either a citrus berry or whatever kind of berry they want to use in the particular generation that they're playing. And then Harvest has a 50% chance of getting that berry back at the end of the turn for free, which means they can stay behind their substitute a lot longer. And because the berries will give them more HP back than the leftovers would, then that's a decent option. However, that strategy is quite limited, and so Exeggutor, between the fact that that strategy is limited and the fact that Exeggutor's stats aren't very good, it generally only sees very, very low tier usage. Alolan Exeggutor recently has taken to running a Custap berry set by using Substitute or just relying on its natural bulk to get down to Custap range. But Alolan Exeggutor is actually able to mitigate its extremely low speed stat and get it use the Custap berry to get to be the fastest Pokemon on the field. And then, because it's also quite a powerful Pokemon, if it can kill its opponent and then get its Harvest off, then the next turn it will again be very fast. It's a very memey set, and I wouldn't rely on it very often, but it is good if it has a good matchup and you get lucky enough to have the Harvests proccing enough. And Trevenant sometimes uses it similarly to Exeggutor. But overall, Harvest is a somewhat limited ability just because the Pokemon that can use it are limited. The next thing we want to talk about is not really an ability, it's a move, it's Recycle. Recycle means that if you used your item, then you can get it back. Specifically, it's a berry, or generally speaking, it's a berry that you're going to be getting back. And so the one stipulation to that is that you cannot have lost your item to knockoff or to something like to corrosive gas. It has to be specifically you had to use the item, like a Focus Sash or a berry. And so Pokemon with the move Recycle can use a berry and then recycle it, get the berry back over and over again, unless the opponent knocks off the berry at any given time. And so some Pokemon can use this to act as a pseudo recovery option. So one Pokemon that uses this famously is Snorlax. Snorlax uses this so effectively that its Gigantamax form actually has the move Gmax Replenish, which gives it a similar effect where it gets back a berry that it had previously used. So other Pokemon that use it will Munchlax, Snorlax previous evolution has Recycle as well, and a Little Cup it can recycle even Berry Juice, and so it can get back its health in that regard without having to use Rest, which is quite useful. However, when it does use the Berry Juice, it does give up a lot of bulk that it would have had with the Eviolite, and so that's just a matter of preference and how the metagame is looking. But just note that it isn't always the best thing to run on Munchlax. Magnemite sometimes uses Berry Juice plus Sturdy in Little Cup to get all of its health back, guaranteed even from full health because of the Sturdy ability. It can sometimes even run Endurer in combination just to make sure that it gets down to that 1 HP threshold, get back its health with Berry Juice, and now it's back up to full with Sturdy. That can be a very annoying combination in Little Cup, but that isn't always seen because Magnemite does need to run other moves. And the final Pokemon that can sometimes run Recycle is Dedenne. Dedenne doesn't really have anything going for it, so sometimes it wants to run a more stally toxic set. And Dedenne also has Cheek Pouch, which gives you extra HP back if you eat a berry. And so if it runs a Citrus Berry plus Cheek Pouch, it can actually get back up basically to full once it gets down to 50% HP just from its berry. If it's behind a substitute, it can use the next turn to recycle, get its berry back, and then be ready to do the entire annoying process all over again. But that's really only because Dedenne has no better options, not because it's a particularly strong strategy. One thing I should mention about Recycle is that it has a high opportunity cost. Not only am I using one of my move slots to use Recycle, but I'm also losing my item slot to a berry. And while that berry can be useful, I don't have an Assault Vest, I don't have a Life Orb, I don't have what other item I might have wanted otherwise. Maybe I wanted a Choice Scarf Magnemite, can't have that. I'm running Berry Juice. But that's fine. A lot of these Pokemon generally are okay running berries, and so they're willing to give up the move slot for Recycle just to have more berries. However, if you're not a Pokemon that really, really wants the berry, then it's not really worth running Recycle because you're giving up a move slot. So just because a Pokemon has the move Recycle doesn't mean that, oh wow, I should use a berry on that. No, that's a bad idea. You're losing a move slot, and that can be a waste on Pokemon. Now back to abilities, we've got the ability Gluttony. Pokemon like Alolan Muck and Shuckle and Linoon have the Gluttony ability, and that allows them to eat a berry at 50% HP. So these Pokemon will oftentimes use those fat or super berries because they are 33% as opposed to Citrus Berries 25%. So they're very useful for them specifically. Another Pokemon that gets Gluttony in Generation 9 is Lechonk. So it remains to be seen if Lechonk gets a better ability, or maybe it will change abilities when it evolves. But as for now, at the very least, it could be very easily seen that Lechonk could use its Gluttony ability. However, it may also get a normal recovery move, and it would not need to use Gluttony to heal health. Maybe get Slack off, for instance. Finally, Cheek Pouch acts very similarly to Gluttony, where I get an extra benefit for eating a berry, and Dedenne, like we previously discussed, is a Pokemon that would benefit from eating a berry, and so Cheek Pouch acts in a similar fashion, where hey, I get something extra benefit for my berry. Now, Belly Drum is a move that often gets paired with berries, and you have two options when you're using Belly Drum. You have the Sub-Salac Berry Belly Drum sets, where I get a +1 from the Salac Berry, and I get a Belly Drum off to get my health down low. However, the Salac Berry is a pinch berry, meaning that it only works at 25% health, and Belly Drum only takes you down to 50%. So we need to get rid of an extra 25% of health in a safe and effective manner, and the best way to do that is substitute. Once again, I'm using my own Pokemon to dictate how my HP is lost, meaning I get to decide when the Salac Berry is used. Pokemon that use this strategy are Como. Como uses Sub, Belly Drum, Drain Punch, and then whatever move in the last slot that it wants to use. And it can get itself down to exactly 25% health, get its Salac Berry so that it outspeeds a lot of Pokemon, and it has its max out attack stat with Belly Drum, and that is a very threatening set. Poliwrath is another Pokemon that runs a very similar set, although not nearly as effectively. Galarian Darmanitan, of course, has Guerrilla Tactics, but if you run Zen Mode Darmanitan, you're going to get extra speed and new typing, and so that can be very powerful as well. You give that a Salac Berry and Belly Drum, and a Zen Mode Darmanitan can be very scary. However, you know that Galarian Darmanitan doesn't have the same ability to abuse Drain Punch, and so it's going to be a more risky strategy because you can't get any health back. Then there are Pokemon that, instead of getting the extra speed, they want to get some of their health back. And this is a much more safe strategy, a much more consistent strategy, generally speaking. Pokemon like this would be Linoone. Linoone, because it has Gluttony, can use a Fat Berry. So it will often use, your Iapopit or your Wiki or whatever to get its health back. And Pokemon like Zangoose or Azumarill, which do not have the Gluttony ability, will just have to settle for a Citrus Berry. But having 25% health back means that after Belly Drum, you've only lost a quarter of your health, which is oftentimes quite acceptable. So those would be the two examples of berries that you would use with Belly Drum specifically. We've already talked about Natural Gift, and I'm not going to mention it again because, again, it's only really used in Draft. But we do want to talk about Belch. Belch is a very peculiar move. It is a very powerful poison type move, but it can only be used if you have eaten a berry. So Pokemon have to first get a berry eaten as quickly as possible. And the prime example of this is Hydreigon. Hydreigon is a dark and dragon type, meaning that it has to worry a lot about fairy types. However, poison type Belch is a very strong move and can often obliterate fairies. But if Hydreigon hasn't eaten its berry yet, it cannot threaten those fairies. And so Hydreigon has to find ways to get that berry eaten. Something like Substitute is a very good option because I can substitute down, get a Citrus Berry, which is only at 50%, quite easy to get into that range after 2 substitutes are already there. And now that I have that substitute up, now I have my Belch online, and the fairies have to run. So if you ever see a Hydreigon substitute up, there's a very good possibility that your Clefable or your Topper Fini are in a lot of danger. This can also synergize with sub-Nasty Plot sets, so you run Sub, Nasty Plot, Dark Pulse, and Belch. And you can get down to that 50% range to the Citrus Berry procs. If the opponent did not break your substitute, well, great, I just got to set up a Nasty Plot, and I can obliterate lots of Pokemon as a result. One other Pokemon that uses Belch, and not very many Pokemon use Belch, but one other Pokemon that can use it is Victory Bell. Now, Victory Bell does have Gluttony, so you might be tempted to use Gluttony Victory Bell. However, I don't really think that's usually the best set. I think better to run it on a Chlorophyll set because you get more speed more consistently from Chlorophyll than you would with a maybe Salac Berry Gluttony set. However, it's just something to consider if you want to play around with that. Victory Bell would get the same type of attack bonus off of Belch, and so it would be quite powerful. However, it doesn't really need the move Belch because it has moves like Sludge Bomb already, so it would be more of a Mimi option, and so I don't necessarily recommend it, but it is something to note. Generally, however, Belch is not used because it does require you, 1, to use a berry as opposed to any other item, and 2, it requires you to get that berry eaten as quickly as possible so you have your move online. Now, of course, you have to be able to control how that berry is used. Now, if Hydreigon were, for instance, to use a Roselli Berry to tank a fairy type move and then retaliate, well, you can't click Belch on the same turn that you eat your berry because you haven't eaten it yet, and so the game won't allow you to select Belch. So that doesn't work. And really, there aren't very many situations where you want your offensive Pokemon to be taking lots of hits because they can easily one-shot you. And so generally, you need to use a move like Substitute and get your Pokemon in range of a Citrus Berry, and that's your best bet for getting the Substitute up. One final note on Belch is that it is not a sound move despite the way the name sounds. So Toxtricity does learn the move Belch, but it does not get boosted by Punk Rock, unfortunately. So just, keep that in the back of your head. Let's talk about the cussed out berry real fast. The cussed out berry is quite useful for Pokemon that have a specific role to play and want to either get off a lot of damage or they want to fulfill a specific role. For example, one Pokemon that runs a cussed out berry will be Skarmory. Skarmory is the kind of Pokemon that wants to set up spikes and keep spikes up on the field, but it often invites some Pokemon that can rapid spin or even worse, defog on it. And so if it runs the cussed out berry, Skarmory has the sturdy ability, meaning that it is guaranteed to live any hit from full, and because Skarmory also has good defense, it can often live hits even if its sturdy isn't intact. And if it gets into cussed out range, then it can either Brave Bird or it can do a number of things, maybe get up an extra spike on the way out, depending on what's in front of it. And so the cussed out berry allows it to keep up spikes or get up spikes on the field. And so the cussed out berry is often used on Skarmory. Skarmory, of course, can use the cussed out berry specifically because it has sturdy. And so you get to decide when that cussed out berry is used. Another Pokemon that similarly acts like that would be Shuckle. Shuckle has multiple hazards that it may want to set up, like Stealth Rock or Sticky Web, and it wants to make sure those stay up. Now, Cussed Up also has the move Final Gambit, which can kill Shuckle and deal the remaining amount of HP it has to the opponent. Now, Shuckle doesn't have that much HP to talk about, but especially if it's in Cussed Up range. But the fact that I'm no longer on the field means you cannot rapid spin, you cannot defog, and I can go into a more offensively based Pokemon to threaten out your defogger or your rapid spinner. And so Shuckle often uses a sturdy or even sometimes gluttony in combination with Cussed Out Berry in order to make sure that it can keep up its hazards on the field. Another Cussed Out user is a Pokemon like Golem. Pokemon like Regirock or a Pokemon like Gigalith used to run sturdy plus Cussed Up as well, but Regirock has better options to run nowadays, and Gigalith never runs sturdy anymore. It usually almost always runs Sandstream, and as a result it no longer has that sturdy combination, which allows it to guaranteed get its Cussed Up off, unfortunately. But Gigalith or Golem, and Golem still uses this, likes to use Cussed Out Berry to explode on their opponents. So if a Golem comes out and is at full health, it doesn't matter what you hit it with. If it gets taken down to a low amount of HP, well, it's going to be in that Cussed Out Berry range, and it can get up a Stealth Rock or do whatever it wants, and then on the subsequent turn, it can explode on you and do lots of damage to whatever switches in or stays in. So that's a kind of Pokemon that wants to do a lot of damage to you. Then you have something like a hybrid. You've got Donphan. Donphan sometimes sees Cussed Out Berry use, again because it has sturdy, and sturdy means that I can live any one hit. Maybe I want to get a knockoff off, where I want to remove your item. Maybe I want to get a strong earthquake off, or maybe I want to rapid spin to get your hazards off the field. Well, if that's the case, then I can use Cussed Out Berry, and in combination with my sturdy ability plus my good bulk, I can get one final last-ditch hit off, be it either an offensive one or a utility-based one. Either way, it works. So ultimately, at the end of the day, when you're deciding to use a berry, you have to ask yourself, does this Pokemon specifically benefit from a berry use? Right? It's very rare nowadays, with the preponderance of very strong items in the metagame, that you would ever use a berry on a Pokemon unless that berry specifically could benefit from it because they have Unburden or Recycle or Gluttony, or maybe one of their moves really benefits from it, like Belly Drum. The one exception perhaps could be Lumberry, Dragon Dance, or Swords Dance users because they don't want to get burned or toxic or paralyzed. But oftentimes those Pokemon don't even run those Lumberries anymore because there are just so many better options, like a Life Orb to get extra power, or even protective pads, because maybe a Lumberry will protect me one time, but if I have to deal with a Pokemon like Zapdos, maybe I'd rather have protective pads even, just depending on what the metagame looks like. But a Lumberry still isn't too bad of an option. And like I said before, the Colbur Berry is sometimes used. At the end of the day, when you're choosing your berry, you have to ask, can I make it be activated when I want to? And if you're just using a citrus berry to heal off random amounts of damage, then there's definitely going to be more reliable options out there. But if you have a specific purpose for using it in the metagame that's consistent and lots of people use this move or use this Pokemon, then that could totally be viable. Let me know if you have any questions. This is sort of a strange guide to put forward because a lot of berry guides already do exist, but I wanted to make a berry guide that sort of gave a base rule set of why people would use berries or why they wouldn't use berries, and have that be a guiding philosophy for you going forward when you're building your teams and looking at why certain berries would be used on certain Pokemon. So let me know what you guys think about this guide in the comments below. Let me know if you have any questions. I'll be sure to answer any questions you got in the comments. And have a nice day.